In today's video, I'm going to share ways to overcome creative block and tips to relax with art. I'm going to be going through and showing some examples with artwork I've created, including questions and prompts that you can use to spark your own inspiration for your art journal. And then towards the end, I'm going to also share some tips on how you can do this if you don't have any artwork of your own to inspire your practice, or if you want to start completely fresh. So to begin, I like to compare what I call motifs or series. So pieces that I created with similar materials and styles. That way I can have a bird's eye view glance. I can kind of step away, notice some trends, and I would recommend having a journal next to you that you can write notes, or just making mental notes of things that you feel drawn to or repelled by through this process. Some of the things I recommend looking for are first patterns with the actual shapes or colors, if you think of the different visual elements, and naming what you see, and especially what you feel curious about, inspired about, or drawn to. So for me, I'm noticing a lot of organic lines. I'm noticing contrast with some areas that are darker, as well as that space. So I like that there's some contrast. I'm also noticing differences with color. So you might want to see if you feel drawn to warm or cool colors. You can also make note of shapes. So while a lot of these are lines, there are some circles here in the center. So first, we're just beginning with noticing. And that's what I really love about mindful art activities. This combination of mindfulness and art is this awareness and creating without judgment. So right now, we're simply being curious. I recommend also being curious about the process that either you used, or if you're looking at other people's artwork that I'll cover later, being curious about their process. So having this investigative eye, this playful exploratory eye. So in this piece on the left, I began with the watercolor paints first, and then I allowed the shapes and marks from the watercolors to inform and inspire the ink work that I did with the drawing. Whereas in this piece, that's very similar to neurographic art that I share in some of my other videos, I began with the ink line first, filling in areas with contrast, and then I blocked in areas of color with paint. So if you're ever feeling stuck, if you ever are looking for ways to overcome creative block or other tips to relax with art, one thing I really love and recommend is to change up your process and or your materials. You can also use creative limitations. I'll talk more about that in a moment. So switching over to a slightly different project, my mandala project, but we're going to dive deeper with some questions and prompts, is one other creative limitation is the shape. So it might be, in this case, it's working within a circle. Mandala just means circle in Sanskrit. You may decide to work on a different size. So scale can be really interesting. If you've been working really small, like inchies or in your art journal, you may decide to work larger on canvas, or vice versa, just reversing that. But we tend to have a different relationship with what we're creating just by what we're working on, as far as the material as well as the size. And you may already have experienced that for yourself. If not, it could be fun to experiment with that as well. So this is a recent piece I did actually that did deviate a lot from even my other mandalas, because even though I have some organic shapes in there, it was much more linear. One thing to pay attention to is color. Majority of those first mandalas were in black and white, whereas now I'm shifting into color. So noticing what you feel called to right now and inspired about. And so especially what I notice if I'm feeling creatively blocked or stuck, I like to do something really simple to get me creating right away, where I just start to enjoy the process again. And I'll talk more about how we can free ourselves up for that. This is a very brief glimpse of the writing process I have with my mandalas. I have an online mandala class where I walk you through a 4-step process to create an I am affirmation statement. So that got snuck in there. So that's what that is. If you're ever curious, I'll have more links and descriptions in the box below. I also have some of the materials I use in the box below, as well as my Pinterest board for inspiration. So I want to talk about this when we're looking for inspiration from other people's artwork, or if you're curious about some of your favorite artists as well. I find we often tend to be drawn to, even subconsciously, the work of other people. If you've been looking at other artists, even your environment, things that are around you that you're visually seeing very often tend to seep their way into the work that you're making. So sometimes a great way to ways to overcome creative block is to change your input before you change your output. So notice what's in your environment. Notice if you want new colors or textures or shapes. If you can look up things on Pinterest or Google artists that you might like. So this is moving into a different series, my meditative watercolor doodling series. And one other thing you can do is you can go back into previous work that you have made that maybe feels unfinished or that you don't like necessarily right now, and you can go in and add to it. So it might be adding a word, it might be adding additional shapes or texture, it might be introducing a new type of art material that you can try and layer into it depending on what you're working on. You can definitely check out in the description box below. I'm going to have a Pinterest board, all of my Pinterest boards, if you'd like to look at some inspiration I've curated and collected. And what I love about these ways to overcome creative block is that it's also just tips to relax with art, simply by looking at your art or someone else's art and having this space where we can notice what you really are enjoying, what you might feel inspired by, maybe making a note or two about something you want to try or are curious about learning. All that in and of itself can help to just slow down and give ourselves a bit of space. I recommend it as well. You can give yourself creative freedom to just simply play. One of my favorite things to do is to have paint on the page and then to make different marks. This is more of a pattern play exercise. So again, you can do the exercise, or you can even just go on Pinterest or Google and find other shapes and notice those shapes and that inspiration as well. And today's video was inspired by one of your comments where Allison said, definitely one of my issues is feeling too grim to start, even though I know it would improve my mood if I could. And I just want to say you are not alone. I definitely have had moments where I know I would feel better if I started creating. And sometimes beginning is the hardest part. And so that's why going through just starting to look and then maybe writing down one or two things you want to try or making a couple of marks can get that going where you're not feeling quite as stuck. So I hope that you found this helpful. Please definitely like and subscribe if you'd like to see more, and you can check out one of these videos here if you're ready to continue with some art inspiration.